Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, FA Cup semi-finalist Kevin Day, and him, relative mid-table security Kieran Maguire from Liverpool University. Later in the show we'll be hearing from football agent Craig Honeyman, and he will be answering some of your questions. Some of them, you naughty rascals, ask for the right reasons, and some of them I think is physically impossible to do. Before that, Kieran, it is Newsday, and still the biggest news story dominating the sporting headlines is Chelsea. What's the latest on the Chelsea ownership situation?
Well, it looks as if the Rain Group, who are the advisors that Roman Abramovich have appointed, they've received bids from at least a dozen sets of interested parties. They're going to be filtering their way through them at present and trying to narrow that down to 3 to 4, who will be the preferred bidders. Who it will then become a sort of a bit of a beauty parade to a certain extent that they've got to come up with enough money. I think there will be a degree of additional scrutiny of the potential owners, because the government doesn't want to get directly involved, but at the same time, this is on the basis of the sanctions against Roman Abramovich. So, in an ideal world, I think that the government would like the potential bidders to be buying into some of the issues that are being covered in the Tracy Crouch report, the golden shares, the shadow boards, and if that is the case, I think it adds credibility and credence to Tracy's report, and also it certainly ties up with the views of the fans themselves. So. We've seen some front of house people. Sebastian Coe's got involved with one of the consortium. We've got the former head of, I think, British Airways or British Aerospace, one of the two. Again, safe pair of hands. And I think John Terry has decided to get involved as well, which will go down well with the Chelsea fans. But John Terry doesn't always. Score in the right net. We were discussing his NFTs last week, for example.
Well, I was going to say, if his record on buying a football club is as good as his record on buying non-fungible tokens, then I probably wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. But you've already skewered one misconception there, Kieran, because I, along with many other people, assumed that the Rain Group, who have been asked to expedite the sale, were asked to do that by the government. But you're saying that's not the case, they were asked to do that by Abramovich.
That's right. Because, remember, Roman Abramovich did put Chelsea up for sale prior to the sanctions, and these were his professional advisors. Now, the government will have done some health checks. The government will have done some due diligence. Do they want them to continue? Yes, they are. Ultimately, these shares belong to Roman Abramovich, and his shares and his ability to generate money from those shares has been frozen. So the shares he will have to, at some point in time, either sign off on the deal. He can't be involved in decision making. So I think that he will be sort of nudged towards a particular deal by the Rain Group. The government will want to review it as well, and certainly to protect the money to ensure that none of it goes to Roman Abramovich. And they are professional banks, that they don't want to have their reputation tainted. So I think we've got everybody broadly in alignment here, which is good news, because the other issue is we've got the sands of time running down. Chelsea lose money week by week. We don't know how much money in the bank account. Certainly, the vibes I've got is that the March wage bill is not an issue, which is great. It buys you a further month. And we could be close to signing off by the end of April.
The other commonly held perception, I think, as well, is that the most likely outcome is an American buyer, because they're the most neutral. You can't imagine another Saudi buyer, even if it's a Saudi media group rather than the Saudi government. So you would think that in terms of questions being asked about regimes and international states, some nicer, innocent American billionaires would be your best bet.
I can see the merits in that, but Boris Johnson was in Saudi Arabia himself, I think only as recently as last week.
Indeed, yeah.
And is very keen to have good relations there. So I think for the government to say, yes, we want your oil and gas. Yes, we want relations in terms of industries X, Y, and Z. But by the way, we're going to veto Chelsea. I can't see that being the case, because it would be an inconsistency, and Saudi Arabia is very keen to promote itself as both a venue and a bargaining party in the world of sport.
Yeah, there's another issue that needs resolving very quickly. I was a guest on Hawksby and Jacobs on Talk Sport on Monday. And I love Andy Jacobs, but at the best of times, you wouldn't compare him to a ray of sunshine. And at the moment, he's particularly, whatever the opposite of happy-go-lucky is, he's particularly the opposite of happy-go-lucky, because he's an irate Chelsea fan. And of course, the big issue is whether Chelsea fans will be allowed into the semi-final at Wembley. I think they have to find some way of allowing Chelsea fans in, and it needs to be regulated by the FA. I don't think it can go through a third party, because there will be security issues. I don't think the FA will want the shockingly negative image that will come from seeing a half-empty Wembley. I don't think it's fair that Chelsea fans aren't there, to be perfectly honest, but it surely can't be beyond the wit and wisdom of man, or even the FA, to come up with a way where tickets can be sold to Chelsea fans and none of the money goes to Chelsea Football Club.
If the FA sells those tickets direct, then I think the issue has been addressed. The only outstanding issues would be in terms of, presumably, Chelsea have some form of loyalty point scheme. Are there GDPR issues outstanding with regards to that, transferring the data that Chelsea have on their fans to the FA? But for every problem, there's a solution. So it would make sense. Let's face it, Chelsea fans are going to find it easiest to get to that match compared to everybody else. Because I understand that you've got problems at Palace.
We have,
because there's no trains going to Victoria.
Yeah.
And as for the complete ninniness of having the engineering works from the northwest to London have been flagged in advance for 3 to 4 months. To have Manchester City fans can get as far as Milton Keynes, and I think Liverpool fans can get as far as Rugby, or the other way round.
Yeah.
And then, okay, there will be a workaround. You can go across to Sheffield and get a train down, but we're talking 40 to 50,000 people coming down by train under normal circumstances. And do you want thousands of people milling around on Rugby Station or Milton Keynes Station or Sheffield Station? And the FA are between a devil and a rock and a hard place here, because they sold the deal of cup semi-finals taking place at Wembley as part of the Club Wembley package. And people were saying, well, we're entitled to attend those matches, and those matches have got to take place at Wembley. And also, the FA are skint.
Yeah. Well, the irony is at the moment that the only fans who won't have any trouble getting to Wembley are the ones that aren't allowed.
Yes.
Technically at the moment. And again, it's one of those things. I think semi-finals being played at Wembley is a terrible idea every season except the season where you get to the semi-final, when I think it's one of the best ideas ever. I'm glad to hear you say that every problem has a solution. I've got a meeting on Zoom with my agent this afternoon, so I shall tell him that, tell my accountant, Rob. I've got a meeting with my accountant, so I shall tell Bobby Numbers that you said for every solution there is a problem. UEFA, Kieran, have published their new financial regulations. I know you've been like a kid at Christmas waiting for this to happen. You've been hopping from foot to foot. What do these new financial regulations mean in a nutshell? And it could be a big nutshell if you like, Kieran. I'm in a good mood.
Okay. What we traditionally know as financial fair play, which is based on a break-even model, i.e. you compare your revenue to your costs, and provided you don't lose more than €30 million over 3 years, then all is tickety-boo. It looks as if that's going to be replaced with a soft wage cap. And what I mean by a soft wage cap, it's not a case, we're not going to go to the NFL style where you're given a limit of, let's say, $180 million to spend on wages. What will be the case is that if the noises are correct, and this first came out from Tariq Panja, who's New York Times journalist, who's one of the proper old school Rottweiler journalists, really digs into stories. So he broke this story on Wednesday evening, and it looks as if it's going to be 70% of your turnover can be paid out in the form of wages and amortization. And I immediately plugged those numbers into my spreadsheet, and I think only Spurs of the current clubs in the Premier League would satisfy those rules. So, is this going to result in a significant change in terms of a reduction in spending? I think that's what UEFA, in an ideal world, would like, but we don't know. What's going to happen in terms of player sales? What's going to happen in terms of valuing sponsorship arrangements? Because now you've got to generate more money. So those are sort of the technical issues. What's the practical issue? It means that if you are a club who is presently in the Champions League, you are going to have a huge competitive advantage over those ambitious clubs. So the likes of Villa, Newcastle under the new owners, Leeds, West Ham, the clubs that want to challenge, the clubs that want to break into the Big Six, they're going to find it very difficult indeed, because if you are in the Champions League, that gives you from 2024-25, I estimate, an increase of, you're getting an extra £50 million a year compared to your Premier League money. Well, 70% of £50 million is £35 million. So instantly, those clubs that are already there have got a minimum of a £35 million advantage. If you get to the finals of the Champions League, it's probably worth £150 million. So you take 70% of that, and therefore you've got £100 million to spend on wages and amortisation. So it bakes in the existing gaps within football, and the aim. And though they won't be explicit about it, the aim of this is to maintain the status quo.
Is there no scenario whereby the Premier League says we would rather have our own system than yours, Mr. UEFA?
Well, the Premier League are perfectly entitled to do that, but at present, the Premier League rules in respect of profitability and sustainability are different to those of UEFA, and that's fine unless you end up in the situation that we had recently with Wolves a couple of seasons ago, which we were discussing on the show last week, is that Wolves they sailed through the Premier League rules, and when it came to the UEFA rules, they were in breach, which resulted in restraints of their ability to compete within Europe.
Talking of competing, Manchester City are locked into a thrilling race for the title. As they say on Sky. Thrilling. But they've already come top of one league, Kieran, haven't they?
Yes. Deloitte, the financial advisory firm, they bring out their annual money league. City, I think they jumped from 5th to 1st. So they are now. People say they're the richest club in football. A lot depends on how you define rich. We have a saying in the world of finance that what we're looking at here is revenue. And there's a saying that revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is reality. So City have generated more revenue than any other club. And part of the reason for that is that they are less dependent upon gate receipts than the other big clubs in Europe, because the Etihad does have a capacity of 54,000, which is a decent capacity stadium. But Manchester City, their ticket prices are very competitive. They don't have the same quantity of tourist fans, of fans who will fly into Manchester that the likes of Real Madrid or Manchester United or Liverpool will have, and therefore they can't empty the wallets of those fans to the same extent. So City were less impacted by COVID, and that meant that their broadcast revenues on the back of winning the Premier League, plus of course getting to the Champions League final, their broadcast revenues were very high, and their commercial income was high as well, because a lot of their commercial deals are based overseas, and we weren't seeing the commercial partners either asking for discounts or pulling out.
So what was that? Revenue is vanity.
Revenue is vanity.
Yeah.
Profit is sanity. Cash is a reality. It's a good chat-up line. Never got me anywhere. But,
well, it is. I'm writing it down because I'm thinking of getting a new tattoo, and I might put that on the shortlist. That'll confuse the little fella in Hoxton. I don't believe, Kieran, Celtic and Rangers have ever played each other outside Scotland. And judging by the response on Saturday, it doesn't seem that Rangers fans are keen for it to happen for a first time.
Yes, they have both signed deals to appear. I think this is in November, so I think this is either on the back of or sort of overlapping the FIFA World Cup. But they've signed a deal to play in the Sydney Super Cup with two other teams.
I believe he was a carry-on character, wasn't he? Sydney Super Cup.
Yes, very good.
Yeah.
Yes.
If they had a football carry-on film, Sydney Super Cup would have been the referee without any doubt.
And there's been, I think it's fair to say, a lot of pushback in respect of this from both fans of Rangers and Celtic. I think some of the fans feel that this match is so special that it should not be hawked around as they see it. Looking at the comments which have come back from the Rangers board, they've said we can earn more money from the rights and the broadcast deal in respect of this one match than we can for a whole season of SPFL money. So we're looking at it from a financial point of view. This will allow us to reinvest in the squad. So from a financial decision, you can see the rationale behind it. Celtic fans don't appear to be over keen as well. I was having a chat with somebody who was, I think, Jerry Rangers. Oh no, Jerry from Australia, who's saying, "What's the reaction of the fans down there?" Because both Rangers and Celtic have got huge fan bases down there, and they're saying, "No, we don't want it either." Oh. So we'll watch it, but we don't want it because they like the idea of sort of it's part of that excitement of a Rangers and Celtic match is it takes place at Ibrox or Celtic Park, where and this is one of this is on my bucket list. I want to attend one of those matches before I die, because you hear so much about the atmosphere there. Or Hampden, where you've got a cup final, and they feel it would be sort of diluting that part of it. So there is certainly a pushback from the fans. The board's saying, well, just think about the money. We want to be competing in Europe. We want to be in the Champions League next season. There's daggers are drawn at each other's throats, I think it's fair to say, between certainly in terms of the Rangers fans, they seem in particular aggrieved, and that might be linked to that Ange, the Celtic manager, is Australian, and it is being marketed, or it has been quasi-marketed, as his homecoming to Australia, and Rangers fans going, hold on, if we don't want to be involved in a homecoming for a Celtic manager.
Yeah, their game against Dundee United was delayed by several instances of stuff being thrown on the pitch, which of course you don't want to encourage, but it's always funny when it happens. If
it's tennis balls, it's great.
Of course it is. Do Celtic and Rangers, because talking about this to fans of big clubs in England, of course they're very used to their clubs, Liverpool, Arsenal, Man U, Man City, Everton. They're used to their clubs going off the other side of the world in summer to take part in meaningless tournaments. So do Celtic and Rangers not tend to do that on an annual basis anyway?
They will tour, but they're not particularly. If they're touring Europe, they're quite relaxed, and quite often, Celtic, as we know, have got close links to sort of the Irish community, and going to Australia. Sorry, going to America. There's some big Irish clans in in various cities in the US. So you can see the benefits of that from a marketing, from a commercial generation point of view. But I think the fans of both clubs feel the fixture itself is so sacrosanct that they only want it to be taking place in Glasgow.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I've not been to an Old Firm derby. I've been to a Hibs Hearts game twice at both stadiums. That was tasty enough, thank you. So
yes.
I feel I should work my way up to an Old Firm game. Possibly better if I went to one at Celtic rather than Rangers for obvious reasons. I like that. That's masterful teacher's understatement there. Celtic, of course, have close links with the Irish community, which is indeed one way of putting it. Two clubs, Kieran, have held your birthday present over for a couple of weeks because we did say to them, don't all publish your accounts at once. Just hold a couple over. It's a little treat, like giving them a present on Boxing Day. His eyes will light up because he thinks he's had them all. But Southampton and Middlesbrough have both published their latest accounts.
Yeah, and I think what disturbs me about this is the normalisation of losing huge sums of money. So Southampton lost £22 million. That's $400,000 a week.
Yeah.
And I looked at those. That's not too bad. And I've looked at their accounts. We've had we've got our discussion with Craig Honeyman, but which we've already had in terms of recording. And Craig was saying that the rationale of clubs gambling to get to the Premier League and then thinking their problems are over is a myth.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely right. Southampton have been in the Premier League now consecutively for 8 seasons, and in 7 of those seasons they've lost money. Now that's nuts. Yeah. What's if you're chasing the rainbow, if you're chasing this sort of this myth of you get to the Premier League and you become rich, actually that's not the case, because you get to the Premier League and then it could cost you a fortune to try to avoid relegation. So it is crazy. I mean, admittedly, Southampton have managed to cover those losses in some years through player sales, but for any business to have an increase in revenue of 5 or 6 times the amount and still to be losing money on a day-to-day basis just shows how crazy football is.
But unfortunately, Kieran, you're going to be seeing this for the next 5 or 6 years because COVID is a fantastic excuse, isn't it, for normalising losses? In half a decade's time, clubs will still be saying, well, we're recovering from the pandemic. And that's going to be a handy little safety blanket for some of them, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's the same with Borough. Borough lost £30 million, and you go, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and Steve Gibson is one of those owners that is prepared to cover those losses, and I think and Craig's a Borough fan himself, was saying that there's not that many of those owners around, but hats off to Steve Gibson because he's been doing it for a long time.
Well, I'm going to blame the accountants here, Kieran. The sooner you people stop saying, "Oh, that's okay," the better. Why have I got the only accountant in the country who doesn't go, "Oh, that's okay"? Something needs looking at here, Kieran, isn't it? I need one of those accountants who just look at Southampton's accounts and go, yeah, it's all right, 20 million loss, fine, sort that out. Some good news for Derby, possibly, with some possible financial help coming in, but it's from boxing, not from football.
Yes, this is the Zach Parker versus the Andrade fight. It's taking place in May. I think tickets go on sale at the end of this month. It's taking place at Pride Park. Zach Parker, I believe, is a big Derby County fan, and he said that £10 per ticket is going to Derby County, right, which is a fantastic gesture. I'm sure it will be a night to remember. Boxing at a football ground does generate its own different atmosphere to what we see at football. But it's very generous of him to make that commitment to the club that he loves, and I think it shows that football is something which people do hold so dear that they're willing to show such generosity.
Is that something, Kieran, talking as an ex-administrator yourself, I mean, is that a way of funding that administrators would look at and say, well, why don't we hawk the ground around for bands or for concerts, or because even if you raised 20 grand, 30 grand, that's a half a player's wage, isn't it? So it's not bad.
Yeah, it is not bad. I think if we take a look at the type of bands who you'd need. Derby County, you'd be able to get 30,000 people to attend.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah,
tours are organised way in advance. It's we've set up enough advance notice for the price of football live.
Yeah,
and we're not selling out 25,000 seater venues yet,
yeah.
So for a band to be able to do it, those tours are normally sorted 12, 18 months in advance, which was prior to the appointment of the administrators.
Yeah, let's face it, Kieran, the sort of bands we go and see, that UK Subs Tribute Act isn't going to fill out Derby County's ground, is it? Our last news story, Kieran. I'm willing to bet that these two clubs have never been mentioned in the same sentence before. In fact, I'm willing to bet quite a large amount of money. I don't think even Jeff Stelling will have mentioned these two clubs in the same breath before. But Dartford FC and Albion Rovers both made a profit in the last financial year. This will be, I'm going to regret this, because I'm going to get loads of tweets from both Dartford fans and Albion fans saying, "Oh, you're forgetting when we played them in the pre-season friendly." They don't speak like that, but you know what I'm talking about.
Certainly not in Dartford.
Yeah, you're forgetting that pre-season friendly. They all talk like Uncle Terry down in Dartford, don't they? Most of them are retired taxi drivers, I'm guessing, which I've annoyed the fan base of two great clubs now. But there will have been some pre-season friendly, no doubt, or some tournament they played each other. But it's good news anyway, Kieran, that both of those, we're talking about Southampton and Borough losing large amounts of money, but here we have clubs at the lower end of their particular pyramids making a bit of profit.
Yes, and it's good in the sense that it gives us sustainability. Remember, a couple of years ago, we were in genuine fear of the future of the 92 and the clubs in the National League and clubs in Scotland and so on. And what we've seen here is a couple of clubs. Dartford made 30 grand of profit. Albion Rovers made 90 grand profit. But it's the fact that they're not losing money. And I've said this about Scottish football on many an occasion. The clubs there set out to be around in 5 and 10 years' time. They don't gamble, and that's certainly linked to. They've not got cliff edges; they've got slopes in Scotland in terms of distribution. So why gamble to get an extra 20 grand? As opposed to in the Premier League, or in the Championship, you gamble to get an extra 100 million in TV money. Dartford in the National League, they did okay, and Albion Rovers. They've utilised furlough. They will have utilised some of the grants that were paid out, and so on. But that's what they're there for. That was the whole point about it, to give these organisations a soft landing and to make sure that they're around to represent their history and heritage and the local community on a long term basis.
Yeah, and oddly enough, the finances of Scottish football crop up in our interview, Kieran. Craig Honeyman is a well-known and respected football agent. Yes, I said respected. And he very kindly agreed to answer some of the questions put to him by you lovely listeners. I haven't quite established from producer Guy whether that means he won't answer my questions. So let's find out. It's that time of year, and our friends at Manscaped have the best tools for some spring cleaning in your pants. Time to clear out that winter bush and join the other 4 million men who trust Manscaped. Just use code PRICEOFFOOTBALL to get 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com.
And now they've got a ball care bundle.
Ooh.
You'll find that their lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, weed whacker, ear and nose hair trimmer, and let's face it, at our age, we're getting hair growing in strange places, and it needs some weed whacking. The Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant, the Crop Reviver Toner for downstairs, the Performance Boxer Briefs, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. And if you purchase now, you'll also get 2 free gifts, the Performance Boxer Briefs and the Shed travel bag.
Yeah, there's a heat wave coming, so you want to be smooth for that. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL at manscaped.com now. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL at manscaped.com. Time to throw out your old hygiene habits and upgrade your life. Craig, thank you very much for joining us. I'm not entirely sure whether Guy wanted listeners to get involved because he doesn't trust me to come up with new questions. But before we got onto those questions, can I just ask you a couple of things myself for context? I believe, Craig, that we both have a background in HR, in which case you've done a lot better out of it than I have. So how did you become a football agent?
You know what, Kevin? That's a great question because I did Google you for some context, I read the funny line that you're the only comedian with a qualification in HR, so that made me chuckle.
Well, the trouble is, unfortunately, it was so long ago. It wasn't even HR then; it was still personnel.
Wow!
I know.
Yeah. So we come from the same background. Then that whole CIPD background, which was great. Really, give me a great grounding. I've got to say. And before getting into football, I worked in a really heavily unionised environment, which was incredibly tough as a young man. I was a young HR manager in my early to mid-20s, dealing with vastly experienced trade union officials that were in the late 40s, early 50s, and they gave me the runaround to some degree. So that was a real good grounding. And in terms of getting into football, I've got to say I was completely in the right place at the right time. And I was doing a NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming course with the hypnotist Paul McKenna. And David Bandler down in London, and in a breakout group, I was working with a woman called Lisa Anderson. Lisa was great, and just a throwaway comment, she said, "You should meet my husband, Jerome Anderson." And it meant nothing to me at that time, I've got to say. And I went home and Googled Jerome and realised that he was the chairman, chief executive of the Sport Entertainment and Media Group, who represented Thierry Henry, amongst others. I went to London, met with him. He offered me a job on half the salary that I was earning, on a 12-month contract, and I took a huge gamble, and that was 18 years ago.
Wow. We do have a similar background then, because I worked for the ambulance service, and one of the trade union leaders we had to deal with on a weekly basis was Jeremy Corbyn.
Wow.
Whose response to most questions was no. Even we used to tease him every now and again and say, "Did you fancy a 20% pay rise?" He'd go, "No."
Brilliant.
And also, just by sheer coincidence, I think my wife probably stage managed that course she did with Paul McKenna. She did a lot. I know. This is spooky, this one, isn't it? I saw an interview with you, Craig, a while back, saying, and I quote here, that you could go to work as a postman on Saturday, then start as an agent on Monday. Is it still too easy to become a football agent?
Yes. The deregulation occurred, and what happened with that really was, a guy could, in effect, a guy or a girl could go into work as a postman or a postwoman on a Friday, wrap that job in Friday night, register to become an intermediary with the FA, pay the £500, and there you go, they're off and running.
And that's it. It's still that easy to become an agent.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
Yeah, it's listen, it's crazy, Kevin. Really, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And look, there's a lot of people, Kevin. The reality is, a lot of people that have done that have finished work as whatever. Some people as accountants, some as lawyers, some as postmen, some as whatever, and they've never done a deal in their lives. Yet they are a registered intermediary with the FA.
Wow. But one of the big issues in my industry, Craig, in comedy and theatre, is traditionally agents will take on a bunch of young comics or actors in the hope that one of them might succeed, or purely to stop another agent getting them. You'll often hear somebody say, "I'm on the back burner now." Does that happen in football? Do you get an agent that just says, right, he'll go to a club and just say, I'll have your 10 best 18-year-olds?
Unfortunately, Kevin, yes, it does. So if you look at the real big agencies now, they're like juggernauts, to be very honest with you. So going back, I worked for the SEM Group for 10 years, and at that time we were one of the biggest in Europe. Some of the bigger fish, surpassed that definitely. And there's a lot of them have been sold to larger, sometimes American corporations. Who've got other sports personalities on their books, and I think from personal experience, Kevin, what these big companies do is they'll go and sign 100 young players in the hope that one makes it to become a Premier League superstar, and then they're happy with that.
So, if for example, because you sort of used the phrase boutique about your agency, if for example, if you had a promising 17-year-old left winger, let's use an old-fashioned sense, and another one became available, would you say, well, I've already got one, I need to concentrate on the one that I've got?
Yeah, so it's something that we've always been very conscious of, my colleagues and I. We are now bespoke, we're boutique, we're small, or we're agile, we're flexible, but we couldn't have two players that played the same position at the same club. So, for example, if we had, if we had a 19-year-old left winger that's playing for the first team of a League One club, and he's going to move on and become a high-profile player, or potentially a high-profile player, it would be unethical, really, to have a 18-year-old or 17-year-old left winger that plays the same position behind them, because how can you possibly go in and bat for both players? It's I don't think you can, personally.
Do you know, I think a lot of our listeners will be surprised to hear you say that, Craig, but I think it reflects very well on your agency. Now, the last question for me is that one of the complaints you often hear from, shall we say, more traditional managers, shall we say the Allardyce Hodgson end of the scale, is that 12-year-olds have got agents now. It's impossible to deal with them. 12-year-olds have got agents. What's the youngest you would take a player on?
Yeah, so the rules are really clear. You can't sign a player the year before their 16th birthday. Okay, so the year that a player is turning 16, that is when they can sign with an agent. But in defence of Allardyce and Hodgson, etc., they are quite right that some are getting around these rules and representing and moving young players.
So what happens? Would an unscrupulous agent make friends with the parents or the parent or the guardian at the age of sort of 12 and just make themselves known by the odd bunch of flowers?
Listen, I've not done it, so I don't know. Is the reality to that? But look, these players, these young elite players, are all attached to academies now. So these academies up and down the country are youth systems, elite development programs, and people go and watch them play. And everyone knows who the next big thing is, years before. Yeah. So if you go back some years, I was acutely aware of Phil Foden at the age of 14, that he was going to be, or had the potential to be, shall we say, sensational. And I think he has become a sensational football player. So yeah, these young guys that you see that do move, and I actually think it's wrong. I actually think it's wrong that players are moving at 12, 13, 14, 15. And if we go back in time before EPPP, certainly we'll all remember when there was a move from Notts County to Arsenal for about 2.5 million for a 15, 16-year-old Jermaine Pennant. Yeah. We'll remember that. Obviously, that move wouldn't occur now because of the EPPP rules. They'd get a fraction of that fee for that player. But I actually think if you're assigned to a club and you're developing at that particular club, so long as everything's going well for you, you should stay at that club. Now, if you get to 16 plus and you can move to better training facilities, potentially better coaches, totally understand why a player and their family would want to take that move. Particularly, let's say, look at a real life example. You're with a team in the conference or a team in League Two, and you're 16. And a Premier League academy wants to sign you, that makes sense for everyone. It makes sense for the club to cash in and take some money for that young player. It makes sense for the player to move to that club to test themselves in a better environment. The only flip side to that, guys, is that it's highly unlikely that the player would come through at the club that they moved to. And statistics back me up on this, where if maybe they stayed at the smaller club, they'd had more chance of coming through and playing first-team football at that particular club. So it swings and roundabouts in terms of young players moving.
You're not a bad talent spotter yourself. I think was it 2013 you tweeted, look out for a young lad called Mohamed Salah?
Yeah, listen, I love Salah. I was made aware of Salah but I've done a lot of business in Egypt historically, and my Egyptian business partner made me aware of him and sent me some footage. And at the time, he was a raw winger. He was a raw left winger, which had blistering pace. He didn't have anywhere near the goal scoring record or technique that he's got now. I've got to say, he was just so raw, but he looked an amazing talent. I've got to say that, and he's really has pushed on to become, in my opinion, right now the best player in the world.
I agree. I think he scored in every game he's played against Palace, which is, it's not always been that difficult to do, but it's not a bad thing. Now let's get on to some of the listeners' questions,
Sure.
Craig. And they're all intelligent questions asked in good faith, I think.
Yeah, of course.
The first one comes from Richard Hunt, and he asked a question that I think perplexes most football fans. Agents, it seems, says Richard, can be paid by the employer and the employee, i.e. the club and the player. Isn't this a recipe for a conflict of interest? And Laurie Roberts elaborates, saying, surely agents should only be paid out of a signing-on fee or wages of the player they're working for.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's a little bit of misunderstanding, Kevin, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
So the reality is, when a player moves or signs a new contract with a club, now there've been three things that have happened in that scenario, right? So let's look at them in each scenario conceptually. So a club wants a player to stay at that club, right? So they're offering that player a new contract, and they see value in that player. So if the agent is then negotiating the contract for the player, they're in effect working for both the player and the club, because the club want to retain the services of the player. The player wants to stay. The agent negotiates the terms. And then what tends to happen, and this is a little bit of a misunderstanding, is the agent is paid by the club for that transaction. And then the player is taxed appropriately on the amount of money that the agent receives. Right. And I think that's a real misunderstanding and miscomprehension in terms of what people think or how people think an agent earns their money.
What do you think then, Craig, that the agent's role is probably the least understood in football? Kieran and I were discussing on the pod last week the notion that fans in general, I don't think, resent the money that players earn. I think they understand that players are doing a really good job and they deserve the money, and they, especially if they're playing for their club and winning them games. But fans do tend to resent any money that agents earn. And is that, you think, because they don't fundamentally understand what your role is in football?
I think it's part of that. I think there's also been a media agenda, which has been anti-agent. If I'm honest, I think they've been an easy target. And look, gents, there are some absolutely fantastic people that work in my industry. Some really bright, dynamic individuals that are super smart and work very well for their clients. There are also some unscrupulous people that work in this industry and see it as an easy way to earn and flip money. So listen, it's like, I guess, if you're a builder or a plumber or they're good and bad, and invariably you all get treated the same in terms of from the media or perception wise, and there isn't a trust pilot for agents. You know, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, Kieran's an accountant. I'm a comedian, so we're in a massive glass house when it comes to not throwing stones about unscrupulous people in our business. Mark Collins has a very interesting question, and it's one that's not focused on finance, which I'm pleased to see. Mark Collins says, when a player comes to the end of their career, does the relationship with the agent immediately terminate, or does the agent continue to provide support as they adjust to normal life? And the reason I think it's such a good question is that I know Neil Ruddock quite well, and I've spoken to him at length about how difficult he found it when he left football, not just psychologically leaving the dressing room behind, but actually physically doing stuff like going to the dentist or getting access to his own bank account. So are you with a player all the way through and beyond?
That's a great question. Who asked the question? Was it?
There's a listener called Mark Collins.
Yeah, Mark, that's a really good question, and I guess it depends, Kevin. Because if I'm very honest now, if I look at the 18 years I've been working in football, some players you can speak to every single day.
Yeah.
Okay. Some players you can have WhatsApp conversations with, or back in the day, BlackBerry Messenger. Remember BlackBerry, where we had the BBM? That was the start, I guess, of the players communicating via messaging applications. And look, I communicate with players on a regular basis. There are some players that I've looked after that don't want to communicate, if I'm being very honest,
Right.
and each to their own. And some players want you to be involved in their lives. Some players want you just to step forward and broker their deals at that time. I've got a long-standing client who is more than a friend for life. I went to his wedding a couple of years ago. When he finishes playing, I'll be involved in his life going forward. I had a friend of mine who retired playing a couple of years ago. He enjoyed his 40th birthday a couple of weeks back. His wife contacted me and asked me if I can organise a few of the lads that he played with and myself to make him a happy birthday video, which we all gladly did. And I guess at the end of a footballer's career, have we been there? Yes. Sometimes people stay in the game as in coaching roles or managerial roles. Sometimes people drop out of the game altogether. Sometimes people stay in the media spotlight. But listen, I watched an interview with Razor Ruddock some years back. And he made some very good points about, having been involved in a professional football club for all his life. He'd never had to make a dentist appointment. He'd never had to make a doctor's appointment. Getting things like cars, finance, all that was done for either by his agent or somebody at the club. And then he steps away from football, and that's not there anymore. And I think it's something that not just agents, but I think clubs, the Premier League, the Football League, and the FA should work on to make sure that players are better serviced when they leave the game. Now, whether they leave the game at 18, 19, having not been offered professional terms, and I know that Crystal Palace have recently done something in this regard, which should be hugely applauded. And I think everyone can do a little bit more with this. It was a really, really great question by Mark. Certainly, I can only speak from personal experience. I've been there for players when they've finished their careers. One is out in South America now, who's just set up his own business doing international removals. So I've given him a little bit of business advice and guidance and support, and put him in contact with certain people where I can help. And I think, we've earned money from these people during their careers as clients, and we should be there to give back. I think it's a great question by Mark.
It is. We've got another Mark asking a question, and again, it's a great question, but let's just say that Mark Collins' question was a little bit of a sorbet to Mark Jones's question. Okay. It's more typical of the sort of question we've had a lot of, to be perfectly honest. And Mark Jones says, I read that, and you'd be amazed, Craig, how many of our questions start with those words. I read that. Yeah. I read that through Paul Pogba's transfer from Juventus to Man United. His agent, Mino Raiola, earned £41 million through various fees, commission and add-ons, even though Juve wanted to sell and United wanted to buy, so he didn't have to do much. Would Pogba have got any of that money? And if not, why would a player accept an agent getting that much money on the back of his own talent and hard work?
Yeah, it's a great question. In terms of Mino, I don't know Mino personally at all. I have followed his career. In terms of this particular transfer, we've got to go back in time a little bit, guys. Paul Pogba left Manchester United to go to Juventus after his contract, ironically, had run down.
Yeah.
And Manchester United, on the back of that transaction, received only around 1.5 to 2 million pounds in compensation. That was it. And this is for one of the best young players in the world. Okay. So when he signed for Juventus, my understanding is that Mino Raiola negotiated terms with Juventus that should they sell him for a certain fee, that he would receive an amount of that fee. Now, this was before transfer fees were hugely inflated. And let's be very honest, gents, they're a little bit out of control, transfer fees. 80, 90, 100 million. I think Pogba at the time was around £90 million and was a world record transfer fee at that time. So if you look at it from Juventus's perspective, they signed a player for 1.5 to 2 million and then sold him for 90 million. And Mino Raiola brokered that transaction in terms of taking him to Juve. Yeah. So he helped them achieve a fee of £88 million. Now, I am pretty sure that when he brokered that deal, I don't know, I wasn't involved, but I am pretty sure that Juventus didn't believe that in 3-4 years' time that they would be selling Paul Pogba for £90 million.
Yeah, fair point.
So they will have been pretty happy at that time to say, if we achieve this kind of fee, then we're happy to pay you this ridiculous fee in return. Because I don't think anyone really thought that that fee would be achieved. It was, and that's where I believe Mino earned his money. In terms of Paul Pogba, Mino Raiola is not allowed, like all agents, to pay players any of the money that they receive. It wouldn't be abnormal, gentlemen, for a player to have a clause in their contract that if certain fees are achieved, that they can be paid an amount of those fees.
It wouldn't be abnormal. Okay.
No, it would not. Listen, if you look at that kind of transaction, so a player going on a Bosman or for a relatively small fee, it can be negotiated when they sign their contract that if they're sold above and beyond a certain amount of money, that may be 5% or 10% of the total amount of profit is paid to the player. That wouldn't be abnormal.
Oh, that's very interesting. 3 questions left, Craig. Thank you again for your time. The first one comes from Robert McPherson. And again, it's another interesting one. Robert says, my club, Ross County, pay wages below that of the conference in England. But how much value would agents give to moving up to what he describes as the greatest team north of the Keswick Bridge, given that exposure in the SPL is much greater than it might be in English lower league? So, for example, Ross Stewart moved to England after a good season with Ross County and is now in the Scotland squad. This season, we've got Charles Regan Cook, who must be on more shopping lists after playing out of his skin for us. Or do English agents and scouts not tend to look at things like that? Is there a mindset whereby English agents and scouts think English football is the only place for an English player to be?
Again, a great question. My personal opinion is the Scottish Premiership is a fantastic shop window for talent.
Oh, okay.
And the reason for that is I don't know if you guys watch much of the Scottish Premiership.
Yeah.
Okay, if you look at Celtic and Rangers are on a different planet. We all agree on that to everyone else because of the finances and the pull those clubs have. However, if you look at a team like Hibernian, Hearts, or Aberdeen, there's a lot of quality in these teams. But if you look at the starting 11 and dissect the quality, you've probably got some players that are championship level. You've got a lot of players that are League One and League Two level, and you've got a few that are conference type level, all in the same team. So, my opinion on the Scottish Premiership is if you're a forward-thinking young English player and you're not getting minutes in England, then get yourself up to Scotland and play and put yourself in that shop window. And it could be that you only need one good season before you get a move. I think Ross Stewart's a great example. Yeah. I think he's probably Sunderland's biggest asset now. He's also got the best nickname in football. I don't know if you guys are aware of his nickname.
No.
The Loch Ness Drogba. Yeah. I have to say that is a very good nickname, but as a Palace fan, I'm honour bound to point out that Fitzhall had the best nickname in football, which was Fitzhall's nickname, of course, was One Size. Which was so just 2 more questions. The first one comes from another Mark, funny enough. It's Mark Cole.
And Mark is one of our many American listeners who provide us with interesting comparisons between our sports and their sports. And Mark says in major US sports, agents have become very tightly regulated over the years, especially in regard to fees and commissions, where it's capped at a relatively small percentage of the deal, usually under 5%. Would attempts to do this in European football ever be allowed to happen by the super agents? In brackets, you know who they are.
Listen, it's a very good question. I guess if you look at the numbers in American sports, what baseball players, basketball players, NFL players are earning at the top level, it is sensational money. It is. We say there's. I think there's a. I don't know why this occurs, but we had it last year with the government, didn't we? Whenever there's an issue, or it's footballers are paid too much, Premier League footballers are overpaid, and you're like, well, hold on a second, they're paid relative to the sport and the product and the business. Now, American sports stars are the same.
Yeah.
In terms of, I don't necessarily agree with percentages and fixing them. And the reason for that is if you're working with a League One club or a League Two club or a Commons club, which many agents are, and some smaller or startup agencies are, then why should they be limited? If they've broken a brilliant deal, and the player's happy with that deal and the club's happy, why should they be limited to 3-4% of that deal when maybe it's more akin that they should be getting 10%? Now, if you fast forward and get to the very elite level, Premier League and Champions League, I think what could happen is that caps are put on rather than percentages, so that agents are not allowed to earn any more than a certain amount of money. And that would make a lot of sense if that happened across the leagues and was widely accepted. But again, it would need to be. You'll recall a couple of years ago, guys, when the English clubs decided to close the transfer window early compared to the European counterparts and hoped that they'd follow suit. And they didn't. And what they did was they hamstrung themselves because they weren't able to buy any more players, but other clubs in Europe were still able to sign their players or sign other players. It just made absolutely no sense why that occurred. And I honestly think that was a play to get everyone to sign up to the same transfer window closing before the first game of the season. Obviously, that didn't work. So any kind of regulation would have to be sport-wide. So it would have to be put in by FIFA and then accepted by UEFA and the governing bodies in South America and in Africa. So you have a consistent approach. I can't see that happening overnight, to be honest with you. But I think tighter regulation isn't a bad idea.
I'm going to bring Kieran in on that, Craig, because that's it's quite a ballsy statement for an agent to make. Kieran, can you ever see that being accepted, that there'd be a cap on how much an agent can earn?
I think it would be very difficult to do that on a FIFA-wide level. Right. And remember, as Craig knows, that we are dealing with a global market these days, because if you say we're going to put a cap on an agent's fee at a gross level, you've got different tax systems, you've got different allowances in different countries, we've got different cultures in different countries as well. The issue I've always had is that I speak to quite a few players and former players. I've never heard a player moan about an agent.
Yeah.
So, why are we so concerned about agents as fans? Because the agent has got nothing to do with my day-to-day life. He's there to represent the player, and or she's there to represent the player. And I don't hear the players moaning. I hear club owners moaning, but nobody forces them to pay the wages either.
Well, yeah, it's strange that, because no club owner moaned more about agents than Simon Jordan, and it turned out we'd be better off with an agent running the club than Simon Jordan. But it's interesting to hear Kieran say that, Craig, because there's been one or two high-profile players recently saying that they, instead of using agents, they're going to use lawyers or solicitors for financial deals and not necessarily use an agent on a day-to-day basis. That must be a worrying development for you, is it?
I don't think so, Kevin. I think the 2 or 3 players that have come out and said this are absolutely elite. You
Right,
know,
yeah.
and we're talking about on the world stage. And I've got to say, these players will have their market value, which will be exceptional compared to the day-to-day player. So if it's, let's say, for argument's sake, that's 1% of players globally that are going down this route, listen, hats off to them and good luck to them. But do they not think that the accountants are going to get paid and the lawyers are going to get paid?
Yeah.
Because they are. And let me tell you, you know, a lawyer who's charging, let's say a lawyer's charging £300 or £500 an hour for being an exceptional lawyer, and is looking at one of these top playing contracts where the previous agent, let's say, has earned, for argument's sake, let's just say 100k on that particular deal to keep a number simple, and they're going to earn off the same deal £4,000 in legal fees. Do you think that's going to really work?
Yeah. Yeah, fair point. Yeah, we know for a fact the lawyers will get paid, and I know
Correct.
for 2 facts that the accountants will definitely get paid, mainly because it's the accountant doing the paying. There's one more question for you, Craig, and it comes from Joe Conway. And Joe would like to know, what's the one thing you would change within current agent guidelines and why?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm going to give him a bit of a curveball answer, if I may, Kevin.
Of course.
And the reason I'm giving him a curveball answer is I've just written my dissertation, and I've done a 10-year study on the finances in the Championship, our second tier. Obviously, Brighton and Palace have been there, but now happily sailing good ship Premier League. And the one thing I would like to see changed in football is the distribution of parachute payments and solidarity payments. And the reason for that, if we just look at the example of someone like Sheffield United, who were relegated last season, having secured one season in the Premier League and had a great season that year, so they're entitled to 3 years of parachute payments, which will total, if they stay in the Championship for the 3 years, of course, just under £102 million. So if we look at Stoke City, who are no longer in receipt of parachute payments, if we look at that same 3-season period, Stoke City would receive 23.8 million in solidarity payments and their EFL TV deal. So that's a disparity of almost £78 million.
Yeah.
And, you know, in post-COVID times, I think it's going to make the second tier of English football uncompetitive. I think we're going to see 2 of the 3 clubs promoted every season being in receipt of parachute payments. And I think it could become a little bit dull and boring. But the flip side of that is the Derby counties, the Middlesbroughs, the Stoke Cities, the Blackburn Rovers, these other teams that are chasing that spot in the Premier League, and there are only 3 teams that get promoted. You know, it really does come down to the finances involved. They've got to really stretch themselves and push themselves to the absolute limit just to be competitive. And we've seen recently what's happened with Derby County and how, you know, I think it's, you know, 6 months yesterday was their anniversary of being in administration. A club like Derby County should not be in administration. And if we strip it back a little bit and look at Mel Morris's ownership and his time at the club, Mel Morris didn't go in there to ruin Derby County. He didn't go in there to leave it in the financial state that it's in. He went in there and gambled to get the team to the Premier League. And if you look at another team that they gambled with at the same time was Leeds United. So Leeds United had the same financial exposure as Derby County, if not more. The difference is Leeds United got promoted to the Premier League. Their gamble paid off, and they're in receipt of huge amounts of money now. just on the solidarity payment, League One teams get £760,000, gents, and League Two teams get 500,000. So there's not a great jump between League Two and League One. It's 200k. But then you look at the jump from League One to the Championship, it's 700k to 5 million, and then you look at the Championship to the Premier League. The minimum team, the bottom team in the Premier League gets over £101 million guaranteed income.
Yeah. If you've done a 10-year study on finances in the Championship, that would explain why Kieran gets on so well with you. I would say though, Craig, that 50% of our news stories and 50%, if not more, of our questions each week, at least, are about the Championship or Championship clubs. And about this huge dichotomy. We speak quite often to the boss of Scottish football, who's been very friendly with us, Neil Doncaster, who talks about the fact that
it's a great guy, Neil.
It's great, but not according to some of the tweets he gets that he tells us about. But he talks about, as Kieran does, about the slope in Scottish football rather than the chasm. But it seems that no one is able to come up with a way of effectively bridging that huge gap between the Championship and the Premier League. And until they do, that's one of the reasons this pod will continue, because until they do, so many of the clubs in the Championship are living beyond their means in that desperate bid to get into the Premier League, because the thinking is that just one season in the Premier League will solve their financial problems for the next 10 years. And it's just a situation no one sees.
And it doesn't, Kevin. And that's the problem. It doesn't, because when the teams get to the Premier League, they realise it's a completely different financial scenario that they're dealing with. But then they look at, again, spending and overstretching because of the value of staying in the Premier League.
Yeah,
I think Norwich. Listen, Jeremy Pease at West Brom, I think, had this model about right, and we'll recall what he used to do. His team used to get promoted to the Premier League. They would then sign the better players from the Championship with a couple of foreign players. Invariably, they would be relegated. They would sell their better players to Premier League clubs, reinvest that money in top players from the Championship without overstretching themselves, get promoted again to the point where it happened 2 or 3 times. And then the third time, they had enough quality to stay in the league without putting themselves at financial risk. The one thing I looked at, guys, and parachute payments. Do you know when the first parachute payment was made?
No.
Right, so the first season of the Premier League was 92-93, yeah? The first parachute payments were paid to the 3 teams that were relegated at the end of the 91-92 season. Luton Town, Notts County and West Ham United all received £750,000 each in parachute payments, and they'd never played in the Premier League.
That's really interesting. The other thing, now we're talking about it, Craig, so it's managing the financial expectation of fans as well. It was when Palace were promoted in 2013, which was well ahead of the schedule that the new owners had set.
Yeah.
The new owners, Steve Parish, Steve Barrett in particular, were very vocal. They talked to fans a lot, saying, "Look, we've spent all the money we had getting this club back on its feet. Buying the club took all our money. We haven't got enough to compete in the Premier League, probably transfer-wise. So the chances are we may go down." And all Palace fans, well, literally the attitude was, "Thank you for telling us that. We're still happy we've got a club. If we go down, we go down." And we didn't. It took us, I think, 6 seasons till we thought we were established. But the fact is that all along, we were told it was going to be baby steps. So you understand that. And what happens is too many people take over a Championship club, promise the fans the earth, spend what money they haven't got to deliver it. And when they do deliver it, they can't keep them up.
Yeah.
And that's where fans get frustrated.
I think as well. I'm a fan. You're a fan. We're all football fans here. I'm a Middlesbrough fan, and I look back at Middlesbrough's time in the Premier League, and I think we became, or certainly I did, a little bit complacent. A little bit arrogant. Dare I say? And we had Steve McLaren in charge of Middlesbrough at the time. And we qualified for Europe twice and went to a UEFA Cup final. and we complained about the football. A lot of us, I promise you, a lot of us complained about the football that was on looking back. It was fantastic, but because the level was raised and the expectation level was raised, season in, season out, and fans expect owners. Look, the same fans that criticising owners for being frugal and not spending the money are, on the other hand, criticising them for not spending the money to make the team more competitive. I think if we look at Brighton, I think Brighton have got a great ownership model. I think Paul Barber's a wonderful CEO. I think the football club play really nice, lovely football. But I think they've hit a plateau. I think they're at a level now. And I think I listened to the pod recently, and I think you've scored 10 goals at home this season for the fans to watch. And what does a club like Brighton do? They can't overstretch themselves financially, which I applaud them for not doing. They've got to be a little bit creative and take some risks in the market with a little bit of unknown players and then high quality players on loan. I think that's the market as well. The real top clubs are stockpiling talent, particularly young talent. We've seen Conor Gallagher, who I think is one of the finest midfield players in England right now.
Yep.
He's had a wonderful season on loan at Crystal Palace. And we see the benefit of those type of loans, not just for the players, but also for the clubs, and importantly for the fans. This is a sport which is born on fans turning up on match day and watching games. And look, without football fans, football wouldn't exist. And I know people really have some strange comments about the value of the TV deal. The value of the TV deal only exists because people are watching the games on TV. There's still the punts that turn up at the stadium still impact, not as much, Kieran, as we know in terms of the top clubs, how much they contribute to their bottom line and their income, but they still do impact. And I'll tell you a funny story. There's you'll remember when Mark Viduka was playing for Middlesbrough.
Yeah,
he was. He'd been out injured for a long time, and he was back at the training ground up at Rockcliffe Park, and I was there, and he was signing some autographs for some fans, and one guy decided to give him a bit of abuse because he'd been unfit and hadn't played, and said to him, "Don't forget, I pay your wages." And Viduka just stopped, looked at him, and went, "You must be a really rich guy," and walked off.
Craig, it's been lovely to talk to you. I agree with you. I don't know what's happening at Brighton. If they can't even get into the semi-finals of the FA Cup, Craig, I don't know. Something clearly wrong at that club. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Craig. Thank you so much for giving us your time. It's been really interesting.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
I've found that a really interesting interview, actually. I have some really interesting insight. I didn't realise it was the 6-month anniversary of Derby County going into administration. I doubt if even Moonpig have got a card for that scenario. But that 6 months is a hell of a long time for Derby fans to be sitting on their anxiety. I also didn't know there was a circumstance from that interesting question we had that players could get a slice of the agent's fee if that was negotiated beforehand.
Yes, yeah, no, it was enlightening. I got to know Craig. I've been teaching Craig recently on a price of football course, and I learned as much from him. I probably learned more from him than he learned from me, because I just shout randomly amortization and FFP sort of into a microphone, in the hope of being able to sort of convince people I know what I'm talking about. But Craig was fascinating, and he wants to represent his clients, and he wants to look after the interests of his clients, and I think this is certainly I've got to know a few footballers in recent years. You've known a lot of footballers through your connections with Match of the Day and so on. And the footballers don't seem to have that much of a problem with their agents, because you work in the entertainment industry. Having an agent to represent your interests is part of the standard approach.
Yeah, also very interesting to hear an agent get so worked up as he did about the unfair distribution of money in English football. You wouldn't think it was something that an agent would be too fussed about, except, of course, when he's trying to distribute some of it towards one of his players. But he's clearly sincere in his belief that we need to find a way of bridging that chasm, especially between the Premier League and the Championship.
Yeah, it's it encourages gambling, and if you're going to gamble and you're going to then say it didn't work out this time, we go again, that's fine. But as we've seen with Derby County, what happens if you gamble, get bored, and we end up with this scenario that we've got at present at Pride Park.
Well, that's it for today, except to say we look forward to seeing some of you tonight for our first ever live show. And if we don't make a complete balls up of it, we look forward to announcing dates for more shows in Plymouth, Peterborough, Tranmere, Accrington, Jersey, Belfast, the Wembley Arena, Las Vegas and Dubai before the inevitable cruise ship franchise that we've got lined up in 2023. We plan to have 5 separate Price of Football shows on 5 different cruise ships going out at the same time. If you want to help us with that ambition by donating a small amount of money, then that'd be very kind of you. You can do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you've got a question for our Monday Questions pod, then please go to questions@priceoffootball.com or email even questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, once again, folks, thank you for all the support you give to us. We're recording this on the Wednesday. No pre-match nerves as yet, but we're genuinely looking forward to meeting some of you, and we will have some special guests. Not all necessarily with 2 legs. So we'll have to see what on earth that means. If you want to support the show, Patreon is one vehicle that you can use for as little as £1 a month. We appreciate every dime, as they say in the States. The other way of doing that is to go to your app that you use to download your podcasts, and you can give us a review. It genuinely makes a difference. It helps us. If you can give us 5 stars, it keeps us in the charts, and we are punching above our weight given sort of the niche nature of the show as far as the charts are concerned. It doesn't matter what you say. You could say you would rather have the show presented by Snoop Dogg and Delia Smith, and it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference. That would be a fascinating story, a fascinating show, and I can just imagine the type of things that they'd be cooking together.
I can just imagine that. I know some people get really annoyed when I say this, but I've worked with both of those. And both of them are very charming people. It's and both of them are very good at the mic drop as well. Delia,
oh, really?
Oh, Delia's mic drop when she was on the pitch at half time.
Oh, yes.
when I don't know if producer guy legally allows us to say this, one would suggest that perhaps 1 tablespoon too much of white wine had gone into the risotto. That would be the most laid back pod. I should imagine Snoop Dogg and Delia. It's so laid back, and inevitably Snoop Dogg would come out as a Catholic as well, because she's I just imagine the confused look on Snoop Dogg's face as he comes out with his rosary going, how did that happen? Bye everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.